Emmanuel Macron crossing live.
What Chancellor Merkel and President Biden just said, I'm very much in line with them. You are asking me how the transatlantic partnership and West can be useful. I think that we have a historic role to play today. And I would like to share with you two main ideas. I think that the first thing we need to do, Europeans and Americans, as we now have a common will to work together again, I think that we need an effective multilateralism, a useful multilateralism for climate, to preserve our democracies, and more specifically, when we are talking about preserving and protecting the freedom of speech and making sure that there is no online hate. So this is the reason why we need to regulate internet platforms. And there is also the question of inequalities, because I think that if we want globalization to succeed, and I think that we won't be able to succeed without our neighbors, more specifically Africa, we need to find solutions to inequalities with our neighbors. And this is our agenda with Africa. It's our agenda at the FMI, where we are calling for special drawing rights, and we also are working on restructuring African debt. And this is also what we are pledging to do for health. And again, I fully agree with what President Biden and Chancellor Merkel just said. This is our common challenge. We have managed to coordinate to protect our populations. We have managed to innovate and to find new vaccines and now to roll them out in our countries. And I think that if we want an effective multilateralism, our challenge now for us, Europeans, Americans, is to make it possible for all the countries in the world, emerging countries, poor countries, make it possible for them to access vaccines. And this is what is at the heart of the Act A initiative, which was launched together with the WHO. And this is our challenge today. A few hours ago, in the framework of the G7, we announced a very important amount of money for this. And there is one idea that I defend. Well, there are 6.5 million health workers in Africa, and we need 13 million doses of vaccines so as to protect health workers in Africa. And if we, Europeans, Americans, manage to deliver those doses to Africa very quickly, well, this will be extremely successful. And this represents 0.43% of the vaccine doses that we have. But if this is something we need to do immediately, but if we announce today that we are going to give money, billions of euros in 6 months, well, in that case, our African friends are going to buy vaccines directly to Russia, to China, or to pharmaceutical companies. So I think that this is a very concrete and pragmatic idea. And the second pillar of our common destiny and of the work that we have to do together as Americans and Europeans is to build a security agenda. Angela Merkel said many things about the different regional situations, and I fully agree with her, so I'm not going to repeat what she just said. I'd just like to say that we have this common security agenda, and there are three things that we need to do together. The first one is that we need to build or to rebuild the security agenda or the security architecture together. And this is the new strategic concept of NATO. I think that all I said last year remains valid. There is a committee of wise men that worked on this topic, and now it is up to the heads of states and government to discuss those proposals and try and find the new security architecture. And this common concept is also means that we need to have a dialogue with Russia. It's indispensable for us to be peaceful. And the second thing we need to do is we need to find solutions to regional issues, well, from Sahel, where we are fighting terrorism, to Syria or Nagorno-Karabakh or Libya. Well, we need to build security and make sure that we act together in a coordinated way by respecting all the allies, which has not always been the case over the past months. So we need to find a way of working together between allies, but also between members of the UN Security Councils and also between partners, so as to find common solutions. And Iran, of course, is also a major issue. And the third major challenge that we have is to maintain what I will call the freedom of sovereignty. This is the former Prime Minister of Australia who used to call this like that. And this is what we have to do in cyberspace, in space as well, because those are new places of potential conflicts. So we need to defend the freedom of sovereignty so that we can be present there, but this is also at the heart of our agenda. We don't always have the same definition of this concept, but I think that we need to make sure that we find solutions to the regional situations, build security architecture that we can trust. Those are the main points that we need to defend. I'm not going to speak for longer because I want to be able to answer to your questions, Ambassador. Speak for longer because I want to be able to answer to your questions. Ambassador. Speak for longer because I want to be able to answer to your questions, Ambassador. Speak for longer because I want to be able to answer to your questions, Ambassador.
On several occasions, what the concept of strategic autonomy should mean and could mean for Europe, for the European Union. This concept is speaking here at a transatlantic event, is interpreted by some in the United States as an attempt by Europe to move away from the United States, alienating itself from the US, potentially even damaging NATO. Could you explain to us and to our American listeners why this concept should not stand and would not stand in the way of repairing transatlantic cooperation and trust?
The opposite, indeed. First, because when you look at the burden sharing within NATO, a large part of the investment, a large part of the commitments were made by the US. This is why, as Chancellor Merkel fairly said, we have to increase our defense investment. We will reach in the coming month the 2% of our GDP in defense expenditures. And I think this is very important because this is the way to rebalance the transatlantic relation and to provide the evidence to our US friends that we are reliable and responsible partners. And I think having a European Union much more invested in defense makes us much more credible as members of NATO. This is the first point. We reduce the net contribution of the US in the partnership. We take our responsibility. We provide the evidence. We are reliable. The second point is that when you look today at the situation, we need more Europe to deal with our neighborhood. I listened very carefully to President Biden and the common challenges. We do have common challenges in Africa, in Middle East. But we have an agenda which could be not totally different, but with, I would say, perhaps not the same level of priority. One of President Biden's predecessors said at a point of time, now the US is become a Pacific power, meaning looking at China and the Pacific Ocean. It means that it will refocus the US to other regions than our neighborhood. During decades, the US within NATO was totally focused on Europe, defense of Europe, and our neighborhood. And I think it is time for us to take much more of the burden of our own protection. Europe, the European Union, its key members, have to be part of the solution of their own security. When we speak about this architecture of trust and security, when we discuss with Russia or China about ballistic missiles or missiles involving our countries, we should be part of the negotiation. When we speak about security at our borders, it is normal that sometimes the US could decide to be less involved. If we are too much dependent in the US within NATO, we can put ourselves in the situation to be no more protected at our borders. And we experienced this situation in 2013, de facto, in Syria. So I think we have to be a trustful partner. I do believe in NATO. I do believe NATO needs a new political momentum and clarification of its strategic concept. And NATO needs more political approach. And I do believe that the best possible involvement of Europe within NATO is to be much more in charge of its own security and to be much more in charge of this strategic autonomy. This is totally compatible. More than that, given the arguments I just presented, I think it will make NATO even stronger than before.